evening and welcome to the University of Reading for this alumni lecture. My name is Robert van der Roos, I'm the Vice Chancellor of the University, and as you can hear from my voice, I'm just recovering from a cold that I picked up somewhere in one of our other campuses. I'll keep my introduction as short as I can before I send everybody to school with this very deep voice. The theme of tonight's lecture is architecture and the key role it plays in shaping our communities and transforming how we live. The University's School of Architecture opened only in 2016, complementing our strong expertise and reputation in construction management and real estate and planning. And we are internationally renowned and recognized for our teaching and research, ranked third in the UK for research impact in architecture, built environment and planning. We are the 5th highest ranking UK university for architecture and the built environment. This summer, we saw our first cohort of architecture students graduate, becoming part of our alumni community. And we look forward to many more architecture graduates playing a leading role in designing our future. And we are very grateful tonight to the Shanley Group, who have sponsored this evening's event and also supported a number of activities within the School of Architecture last year as part of their 50th anniversary celebrations. And it is now my great honour to introduce our guest speaker to this evening, Piers. Piers is a renowned, award-winning architect, broadcaster and academic. He has founded 2 architectural practices and he co-presented a number of series on BBC 2, including the one you all know, The World's Most Extraordinary Homes and The House That 100,000 Built. As well as winning awards for his architectural innovation, he also won Celebrity Mastermind in 2016, especially subject being Piers is currently completing his PhD here at Reading, the title of which is Contingent Negotiation. It explores the consequences of making to explore alternative design processes. Drawing on his research, he will tonight be discussing how architecture can bring about transformations in people and places. He will also be exploring the synergy between academia and architectural practice. So we are delighted to have Piers with us this evening. I'm sure that his professional and personal perspectives will be really and very insightful. So without further ado, and while my voice still lasts, please welcome Piers.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you all of you for coming. I have slight imposter syndrome because I don't really feel like I'm a proper architect. I am an architect actually, but I operate on the kind of fringes of what architecture is. And tonight is a story, I guess, about a slightly different way of working. I also have imposter syndrome. I mean, I'm certainly not an academic in a room that's partly full of real academics, but I have imposter syndrome because my parents were sort of intellectual snobs, and I was chucked out of school at a very early age. I had no labels. I went to university as a mature student in Australia in, I guess, about 1990. And so I'm not an academic, and I'm hardly an architect. So I'm going to talk tonight about 25 years of trying to understand what my place in a world that actually strangely conforms might mean. Because this is, I guess, my practice. I don't even really have a practice. I kind of have a practice. It's called a visible studio, and it doesn't really exist. It's kind of in the ether, as you'll discover. But in a way, I started conventionally, as many architects do. I studied under a master. He was a Pritzker Prize winner. And in a way, I studied a kind of super orthodox manner of modernism, which was tempered by an interest in what it means to be super regional. So this building that I went to see in about 1990 or 1989, even in Australia, is a house that, in a way, is kind of beautifully ordinary. What's fantastic about it is that it's kind of millimetrically precise in terms of how it links into its natural habitat. There's also an extraordinary piece of theatre in terms of how it leads you to it, how it moves you through it, how it refers you to things in the natural landscape. And Mercut's environmental sensibility has been a kind of roadmap, I guess, that I've carried with me for 30 years or so, although I wouldn't ever purport to be an environmental architect, because I still don't really know what that means. But this is a building that's defined by weather and water collection and light, and also being made in a very rudimentary way with very cheap, ordinary things. So I studied originally in Australia. I came back to London in the 1990s. I went to the AA. When I talked about weather, climate, place, landscape, geography, geology, my tutors at the AA said, there's none of that stuff here. It doesn't exist. What are you talking about? And what they meant was two things. That one, culturally, in Britain, architecture is rooted in a kind of orthodoxy around kind of abstract theory. We think and then we act. We have no understanding of what site or place might mean. We kind of impose things on it. And secondly, in a way, London, in their mind, was always 9 degrees drizzly. So how can we access a way of making architecture that was about sunlight, place, weather, climate, all those kind of things? Of course, they were absurd. But this is where I suppose I ended up. And after university, after the AA, I had a kind of identity crisis about whether I wanted to be in this country or back in Australia. But either way, this is where I ended up. We have a pointer here. This is a kind of house that I'm going to touch on as a sort of stepping stone into what I'm doing now. In a way, it's a building I've described as one that I'd like to see demolished. It's like living in a bad A-level essay. But in a way, it's where my journey into architecture in this country began. And I think what's interesting about it is that when we moved to this site 25 years ago, it was part of a much bigger piece of an estate, and we had to park at the end of the track here, walk down through a piece of woodland to a house. And I think what was kind of interesting about it was that, we lived 500 yards down through a woodland, and we physically felt the weight of our own consumption. So every single thing we consumed, every bit of waste that we produced, we had to physically feel and deal with. And that was an extraordinary kind of eye-opener to, I suppose then, a young-ish architect. Over time, what has been a kind of amazing privilege is to be able to sort of, I suppose, I use the word loosely, but buy this piece of woodland. We're sort of custodians now of this piece of woodland here that wraps around the house. So in terms of a community, there's a very big community of people that live and work around this valley and within this woodland that we now, I suppose I loosely use the word manage, because the best we really can do to woodland is not manage it at all. So the piece of landscape that I'm going to weave through tonight's story is this woodland that was part of this country estate here. And originally it was a house here that was at the end of a drive here that was knocked down in the 70s. And our house is here, my studio is here, my daughter's house is down here, and various other, we have a workshop up here. But when we moved to this place in 19-something, we had to park here, walk down to this point here. And we bought this house, and we lived there for a few years, and in a way, I was curiously unambitious for my own environment. I wasn't really interested in my own space, I wanted to do other things. So in a way, this is sort of showing in a way how I didn't want to be an architect. But what was really interesting about the building was that it, in a way, denied where it was. It had no windows, it had no understanding of how place, site could inform the type of buildings that we might want to live in. But of course, what was also interesting was that it had no understanding of where it was in terms of its geography. So it was on a piece of highly shrinkable clay dominated by a big ash tree that had grown over 70 years. And what it had done, as you can see from these cracks, is made this building drop by about 4 inches over 200 years or something like that. So what we did, we moved in with one child, we had another child, and this is where that house was. And in a way, I was so enamored with being in this valley, I didn't really care that the house didn't really work. This is the view opposite us, towards St Catherine's Court. But these were the buildings that meant most to me. And in a way, I've been schooled in a kind of, I guess, the most, as I said, the most orthodox manner of studying architecture, the sort of institutions that cared about high architecture. But I was interested in these kind of buildings. And I suppose I am grateful for Mercut having to introduce me to the kind of direct way that farmers would be able to make buildings we're not allowed to call them architecture, with the stuff that they had around them. But also importantly, the way that they made these buildings, they knew about weather, they knew about frugality, they knew about sustainability instinctively. They knew how to make stuff in a very simple, direct way with the least possible means, and they knew how to take that stuff and deal with weather. So if you look at these buildings here, you know that that last one faces east because, of course, the west comes across the top of it. We know that this is where the grain is designed to sit with the wind coming across it with those slats, keeping the moisture out and drying the grain and so on. And this is a highly evolved piece of, and I will use the word architecture, although curiously, it isn't designed by an architect. And I think in a way, that's very interesting. And in a way, if we look around us, I think that probably 90% of the built environment isn't designed by architects. And I would say that some of the best buildings that we have aren't designed by architects. So this is the other stuff that exists around us, and this ended up being the palette of the house. So this is the building, and we wanted to kind of live in the view. We wanted, in a way, this is where all of our stuff would come up and down, and the house was designed to come up and down this path, basically. But in the all I knew was really Glenn Murcutt, and this simple diagram was created from Murcutt about how you can build a lightweight building here that touches the ground lightly, that has a transparent slot through the house that in a way deals with wind through the roof form, deals with views in, views out, and stuff that I'm not really going to touch on now, because I feel in a way I've left this way of working behind. But in a way, when you look at this diagram, what you see is a map of where you are allowed pieces of glazing because you had shade from the big ash tree, and where you had to have solid because, of course, you need the shade. And you have a house that allows the water table to remain undisturbed, etc., etc. And this, of course, is the slot of glass that lets the first chink of light in the morning to warm the bedrooms up. There's glazing behind here so you can walk around, not be seen, but see out. And then there's the transparent slot that goes through the house. And then the building is made just with the stuff that we had lying around us, the wood, the timber, and so on. And the outside material is just made from the same stuff as our local B&Q shed. This is kind of last winter, and it's kind of battered. And in a way, I think it's a highly, deeply conservative building. I mean, it's incredibly ordinary in that any architect in the room would recognize the kind of desperate clunkiness and the obvious nature of these moves. And in a way, why I feel I've sort of moved away from this kind of mainstream architecture is that whenever you go into a piece of architecture, you can see those moves. Whenever you go into a building that isn't a piece of architecture, it's so much more inscrutable. Why I like old buildings is that there's an inscrutability that isn't to do with a kind of finite, static piece of modernism, which is kind of what this is. This is actually very recently, I think this is, this is actually yesterday. So, and this is that, B&Q shed. So in a way, that's a pretty building and a pretty landscape for middle-class people, or despite it being built cheaply, and in a way, I have no emotional attachment to it whatsoever. And it made me realise, doing that building, how kind of dumb, how stuck I was in a way of doing architecture that I needed to escape. And in a way, I realised I was far more interested in the kind of consequence of architecture. This is a place that is only 10 miles as the crow flies from where I live, and it's the most deprived part of the southwest of the United Kingdom. It's Hartcliffe in Bristol. This photograph was taken, I guess, about 18 years ago. And it's the High Street in Hartcliffe. This is during the day. Okay, so this is the shop that exists, a couple of other ones, the rest is kind of boarded up. And this is the legacy of a place where the Wills tobacco factory had left. There's no transport links back to the city, and people just existed here in kind of ghetto. There's no employment, there's no way out, and you wouldn't come in. So another call from this place, which is a failing school in Hartcliffe, Harecliffe Primary School. They wanted a new purpose-built art studio to provide a home for these children who worked with resident artists. These were excluded children, to find a way back into education. They're being excluded from school, and we were asked to make a purpose-built building for them that could sit next to them, sit within the school, to allow these children a way back into mainstream education. So this was the room they worked in. This is the way, in that place, that people made buildings for other people. So this is the way we make buildings, but this is the way this is what we do when we make buildings in places like that. So the question for all of us is, how do we weave a building into this place that isn't just a kind of fortress with razor wire or over? How do we do a building that can act as a kind of, I guess, a kind of quasi-symbol of hope without being too grandiose about it? But also, critically, buildings don't deal with life, and I think that's a real failure of architecture, is that buildings cannot deal with the kind of stuff of life. It's really, really interesting. So this is the first photograph I took when I went into that old studio as a reminder that the building needed to be able to take that stuff. We were asked just to fill in this gap, very kind of unambitious, brief, just do more of what they did in 1950, just extend that across there if you can. But of course, as we all know, when you're an architect, the last thing you do is do what your first asked to do. This is the kind of content around, and this is that gap that we were just asked to do this, the kind of most dumb move. And I think what is curious about architecture is that through a few simple moves, you can make a difference. And just by pulling the building away, we made a space here that acted as a kind of gallery, kind of making gallery here. This is where people queued up for lunch. And what it meant was that they saw this thing that was other as a kind of way out, as a symbol of kind of hope. And then it had just two roof lights that looked at the sky as a kind of way of looking up, looking out, and in a way hoping that it felt like a kind of womb-like space that you could go into, do this work with resident artists, and in a way explore a different kind of landscape. This is what we ended up building. Those kind of roof lights that were designed to kind of minimize solar gain and have a view of the sky. And then we just made it out of the stuff that existed around there. So instead of having trees, they had builders' merchants full of this kind of stuff. And I've gone to this lecture by a very famous architect who I know quite well, who had told me with delight how he always made contractors go bankrupt because they could never live up to his kind of way of making buildings. So we thought we'd just make a building the way that they could make buildings. What would it do? We used their skills to make a building, and we just used the most ordinary materials, like concrete block and blue EPDM, to make a building that invited people to graffiti on. What would that mean as a piece of architecture? And in a way it meant this, and it's a kind of ugly building in some ways, and it was an invitation that it could be. I use ugly as a kind of, I suppose, compliment about the building. It's the only building really I've done that I kind of, and in any way kind of enamored with still. But this was the kind of invitation that you could do this to it, and it was unfinished on the inside because whatever we did as architects was less interesting than what people would apply to it, the kind of mess of life, the patina that would build up over the use of it. So this is when it was finished, and this is gradually it now, it's getting more and more kind of made, this is kind of relatively recently, and Nicholas Sirota came and he said that model of art education is the best model of art education we have today. The building is irrelevant. So in a way, the next building we did built on that way of working. But we'd worked with children who became our client at the last school. But when we got a call from my local primary school, we thought, well, let's make a building with it. Why don't we just make a building with can't be that hard? Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we extend what we can do and invite people to join us in the conversation around design? So we did two little buildings at my local primary school where I still live. And the first building, I think we got £5,000. And we made a little green travel shelter, which was this. It went really well. We made it with the kids. That's me, Charlie Brendel, made it with this group. And so we then got, I think, only, I can't remember, it was like 150 grand as a grant to get school dinners. Originally we all had school dinners, and then they were taken out and had packed lunches or meals on wheels. And then, about 15 years ago, there was a push to get school dinners back in school. So they got a grant to have a kitchen and a dining room put back into the school. So we made a little model, and of course that costed 3 times over budget. So what these children then did was understand, as part of their curriculum activities, what it meant to do a building that was low cost, that was sustainable, that was structurally defined by spanning pieces of Douglas fir and tensioning them into a kind of a bowstring, using small timber, spanning the other way. And that was woven into, that way of understanding what a building was woven into the lessons for about 9 months or 12, even 12 months perhaps, before we then made it with them. We then made it with them down at Charlie Brendel's workshop, and of course this was this finished building. Super broad, it was kind of £900 a square metre, and then it was sort of saying to Michael Gove, who was Education Secretary, actually, architects don't always squander money. There is a kind of way of making buildings for very little money that isn't just a kind of flat pack type building. This is it, it's finished, and this is it last year, I think, spring this year. So this then was in parallel with, I guess, my teaching at the University of Bath in third year, where, as you will know, if you're architects, there's very little of this thing that we call making at full scale. So if you're a cook, you make a meal. If you're a musician, you play an instrument. If you're a filmmaker, you make a film. If you're an author, you write a book. If you're an architecture student, you work in a kind of code space. You design a building, it's in a computer, it's in a drawing, it's in your head, it's in a model. And that's really curious. You don't make a thing, you make an approximation of the thing. That is your education, and that is, in a way, your life as an architect. So we loosely, in a way it's too grandiose to say we set this thing up, because we didn't, it just kind of happened around us, this thing that we call, 15 years later, Studio in the Woods. And it was a group of us that got together every year to make stuff with architecture students in a very direct, hands-on way, over a long summer weekend. And curiously, my then business partners would say, why are you doing this? It's kind of such a waste of time. You know, and I kind of knew, for me, it was kind of super important. And if I look at the various one or two things that I've done, I think in a way, curiously, this little kind of summer school has become the most important, oddly. But, you know, we get together. Getting together is very important. We'd share food, and we'd talk, and we'd do stuff. You know, and getting together, I think, was really important. But what we would do, in a very direct way, was take the actual material from the actual site and would mill it in real time, you know, and understand what a real material was and how a real material could inform the way that a building was made, and could inform the process of the way a building was made. So these are some of the early kind of things that we did. You know, I can't even remember what years these were, actually quite recent in some of these. Give you an idea of the scale of what we would make in kind of 2 days or something like that. But critically, I'm just going to tell you about 2 very simple projects that changed the way that I think about architecture. So when I was doing these projects on Dartmoor about, I don't know, 10, 15, 12 years ago, the way that you approach architecture is as, you know, this is a simple way of testing where you need to be to fulfill our one-line brief of how we might make a building. Where do you place someone in a patch of sunlight to allow them to sit over the river and know the river and their experience the river? How do we make a half bridge? What scale does it need to be? You know, so then we know, you know, how to make the thing that fits that space. So we design an idea in our head. We then make that idea. We then make the real thing. You know, as I was doing this, I thought it was really interesting, and everyone had a good time. You know, we felt, in a way, I suppose, reasonably pleased with ourselves doing this. But as I was doing it, I suppose I felt that the theatre of all of this stuff was much more interesting than the thing we would design at the end of it. And I went away with a nagging sort of sense that I needed to do things differently. So the following year, again, I went into this project, and again I was looking harder at a way of changing how I might work. So the second year we worked in Dartmoor here. This was a little way of understanding where you needed to be on the 21st of December to get a piece of winter light in this flat valley bottom on Dartmoor here. So where do you need to be? What's the lowest point you need? Where do you get up to? You know, this is the point that, you know, the other side of the valley that the winter sun at 15 degrees will get to. So we need to get to that point. So we tested it, worked out how big it needed to be, and then we sat down as a group of people, we all had a good time, we worked out what size it needed to be, and in a way we did build a kind of, you know, there were other things that was happening beyond our kind of incredibly straightforward architectural moves. So we built something that is a kind of completed, you know, piece of, I guess, quasi-modernist architecture. It's a concluded artifact. It sits in landscape in a way that we're all incredibly familiar with. But if we look around, we'll see that this choreography is an extraordinary piece of architecture. That kind of temporal stuff that happens around a project that then goes away, it's really much more interesting than what we would ever build. And I realized that was a kind of eureka moment, you know, that stuff's irrelevant. So the next time we did a project with the student in the woods the following year to the Isle of Wight, you know, it was when, you know, one of the many years that Ted Cullen came, of course, who's just died yesterday, and in a way he came every year. His legacy is in many of these projects. So this project that we did looked at what it meant to derive an architecture around the embodied experience of making something and have nothing that appeared and went away, but to make every single move the architecture. And what's interesting about these people have, you know, there are architects, there are architecture students, there are technicians, there are people who aren't architects. There's one of my cousin's youngest children in here somewhere. Together, making something on the ground and defining architecture by how it is choreographed into place through a set of simultaneous activities that somebody has kind of set out and orchestrated. So what you end up with is a kind of incredibly, you know, improvised map of a set of movements that couldn't ever be replicated, could never be conceived in the mind and then made. This had to be made or designed through the embodied experience of making. And then I realized that this was much more important in a way than anything I'd done before. So I then got a call from the AA, the Architectural Association in London, and they had been bequeathed a woodland in Dorset, 400 acres. They bequeathed it by John Makepeace, who, you know, had run out of money, but critically, he'd set up a way of working that looked at what it meant to use juvenile trees in construction. So this is kind of managed woodland, whereas we know you thin a woodland and you pulp the wood. You know, you literally pulp it. It has no use. And he built some extraordinary buildings there. These buildings with Briotto, Happel, and APK. These buildings are kind of remarkable pieces of architecture where these thinnings are used to make this big span workshop where it's tensioned by this Sarnafil membrane. They're an amazing workshop. The AA didn't really know what to do with this, so they did weekends and weekend trips there, units went to visit it. But what we did was try and work out how we could use this piece of landscape as the home for a new master's program where students would come and design and construct buildings. They would come and design a building and write a thesis in parallel with designing and making a building, and they would reflect on their experience. And we got a master, so Andrew Freer came around a unit. Andrew Freer from Rural Studio in Alabama came to run a unit, and his unit designed this kind of rather awful expo plan for a set of buildings. And despite the horror of its kind of, its layout, what this got us was a consent to build a workshop and a series of student houses and a series of teachers' buildings that we could live in, and a new caretaker's house. And that was the kind of gift to us, all on the proviso that they were explicitly experimental, these buildings, and they used timber from the forest in their construction. So this is kind of rural Dorset, extraordinary really to get a consent for all of this. So we said, let's build this one, and then we'll build a big shed, and we'll make all the other buildings out of this. So this was the first model that the students made, and what it did was try and understand how person-sized components could be used to make a big span structure. Person-sized, small-scale pieces of timber that would typically be pulped. Timber engineering is all about, the connection, as we all know, and what we invested in was understanding how we didn't just pump this building full of steel. So this building, in a way, it is a piece of research, was understanding how you could take a simple house builder's screw and with incredibly low skill, just screw this building together without expensive steel and all that kind of, so on. But this is then the engineers saying, instead of trying to be incredibly clever, why don't you just try and be a bit more ordinary and just joist this building out the conventional way with things that sit on top of trusses and things that sit below trusses, which is, so they kind of regularized it, which was really a clever thing to do. We then spent several months prototyping and testing this screw up at the Materials Science Laboratory at Bath University. So this is a screw going in, and then we would pull them out and work out how accurately they needed to go in to take 10 kilonewtons through each screw. This is testing a piece of 14-year-old juvenile larch to look at deflection. That's that pull-out test, actually, understanding that these needed to go with a degree of accuracy. This is a flat to control that joint, etc., etc. And then over the course of the summer, Charlie Brendel, with a group of interns and students, built this building over the summer. But I think still what is interesting about this building is that we thought we were so clever, and I remember someone called Sophie came from Happel who said fantastically, why are you being so conservative? You're a bunch of architects doing what architects do, conceiving of things, they're pretty things, you're making them, and you think you're really clever. But where are the magicians and the mathematicians? Where are the other people who aren't architects? And as people I can see, Flora at the back there will know that every bit of this building was conceived of and drawn in a conventional way. This is architecture at its most uber conservative. It's kind of really interesting. That it's a nice looking thing, it's pretty enough, and it's got a good home for the design and make program. But it's a kind of super orthodox building. This is where the home of design and make is. This is that building here. And we keep this large for 10. We had to keep it for 10 years to measure the shrinkage and understand whether it wasn't going to decay. We tested. This couldn't get building rates, so we kind of load tested it in situ and all that kind of stuff. But it's kind of, and then the next year, we made the first student lodge in it. With these students there, who made a set of trusses for their own building. They took them out, made their building, lived in it, and wrote a thesis about it. There was a little building we made down the bottom, but I'm not going to talk about it. It's the caretaker's house, and I'm going to say one thing about it, which is we were invited to make a little building here that was an essay in what it meant to take a set of materials from within 500 yards of it, because it was that wet summer where we couldn't get any timber out, and make a building just with 5 species of low-grade timber that could be built to passive house standards with insulation and airtime that's using green, low-grade timber. But in a way, that's all you need to know about the building. There's nothing else I can say about it. It's the caretaker's house, it's conventional in its movement, but it was a stepping stone to realizing I need to extract myself from Hook Park, where I made buildings with architects, and try and understand the other 99 0.999 recurring percent of people who weren't architects. And what would it mean to develop a practice with people that didn't just do drawings like this? Sorry, Hannah. Yeah. This is it's kind of fine. But what happened was that we then got a call from the people that own the woodland around us saying, we're going to sell the woodland, can you buy it? And we're going to offer it to you first up. So we put a consortium together, extended our mortgage, and we bought an extraordinary piece of woodland, a 100-acre woodland, that has become the kind of backbone to my practice. And for me, that's where my real life, I suppose, began. We had a kind of way of, doing, I guess, a piece of architecture, doing architecture that somehow felt as if it meant something other than just making buildings in an architectural manner. This is a kind of studio here, and I'm going to talk about this building next. So the building at the Hook Park, one that I just touched on, the caretaker's house, was made within materials that came within 500 yards of it. It was designed and made by architects who drew it and imagined it and then made the building. This building just used the set of trees that were on its footprint. And it just used no architects. It just used the people that lived in terms of the community around this woodland. My neighbour, our house is a semi, in fact, I can't really tell, and other people who had never made anything in their lives before. They're just part of a rural community, they just did stuff, they didn't really think about it, had no idea that what they did was kind of making, And so this is taking a set of trees out from that spot. These are large, trying to return the forest to take out all the softwood and return it to a kind of native deciduous. This is then taking trees and understanding what it might mean to make a building for 15 grand, which is a year's rent for my previous office. And we milled the least we could possibly do. So we just had one good flat on each bit of timber where we needed to make it one thing meet another, and that was it. So we milled the whole building in 2 days. And if any carpenters are here, you'll know that you just need one good face on a piece of timber. That's all you ever look for. This is the drawing, and I'm bored a few people with this drawing before, but I think this is what's interesting about this drawing is that it's an unrehearsed drawing. It is a conversation describing how you might make a building with people that have never made anything before, who aren't architects, who can't read drawings. This is a record of a conversation between me, my neighbour, my neighbour's friend, and a couple of other people around how we might make this building. And of course it's the sort of building, the drawings that we would all do pre-architecture, vernacular buildings will make drawings like this on the hoof, blackboards, just chalk, no measurements, just centre lines and offsets, and using the scale of the timbers as a kind of data. Everything you need to know to make a building is on this drawing, every single thing. And these then are the people that began to set out that building using the first frame as kind of template for all the others that were then made on top of it. But what is interesting about this building was that, of course, that drawing doesn't describe any of the actions that these people need to make to actually apply stuff. It provides a framework for people then to make a building around. And what I had to do as an architect was understand when to step in and when not to step in. When do I become an architect and I control the way things look, and when do I just allow the way things look to be defined by a set of relationships that will be given to it by the people that are working it. And ultimately, I would like to think that the people who worked on it were able to imagine something far more interesting than I could ever conceive of as a kind of solitary, conventionally schooled architect building things in a kind of modernist manner, setting things out, regularising things, normalising things. So this is the building as it was built, and this is the building that we work in now. And of course, it's only partially clad because we only have that amount of timber. And I think that's a really interesting thing. In this age where, of course, we can build anything from anywhere, and an iPhone costs £1,500, the sense that you just use what you have, and when you run out of that thing, you have to find a way of making it still. That's really important, I think. So this is our home, our studio home, it's me, I think, my kids, I remember. And this was built for 15 grand, just using those timbers with no drawings, and all of those relationships are set out and defined. The kind of eccentricity of some of these relationships, set out and defined by non-architects who made it with no drawings, and just a simple set of embodied relationships being the thing that defined it. So if you look inside this building, you know what you'll see. So what's it set out? I mean, what you start setting out there is a way of making buildings where everything fits outside everything else. There are no exact relationships. So there's a kind of common sense way to make a building. There's common sense things that begin to define the architecture, not a kind of conception around the way something should look. But when you look inside, you'll see that the floors, the furniture, was the scaffolding. So there's no wastage. You spend 1,500 quid for scaffolding. You know, a set of stud relationships that is eccentric but work and was given by the people that made it. So they designed the building in a way that I could never have conceived. You know, as an architect, I'm going to regularize it, I'm going to normalize it, I'm going to set it out in 600 centres. Yeah, and I think that is really, really interesting, that they can take a set of skills they have and make a relatively sophisticated piece of architecture with the skills that they have, without even knowing they're making architecture, without even knowing they're making, without even missing the drawings. That's really interesting. Whereas if you go into a contract and make it as a scaffolding, you know, blah, 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 installation piece together in seconds, if you are in a contractual situation, if there's a single drawing missing, effectively you get sued. You know, you get a claim for extras, and I mean, so really, for me, probably only me, I'm really sorry about this, indulge me, interesting. This is the building, you know, blah, 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 light, you know, and I think all the things you care about, I hope, light, space, you know, texture, all that stuff, I think is still there, you know. In a way, I don't need to talk about it. I would hope that we take it for granted that we're going to bother to make a building. It would be, you know, it would be kind of a nice space to be. But, you know, Assemble, I went to interview once, summed it up for me, when they said, so what are we going to talk about? Just the way things, the shape and colour of things forever, or are we going to talk about something else? You know, because I think the architectural conversation is exclusively, really, a variant of what shape something is and what colour something is, and very little else. So this is a kind of attempt to move away from that conversation. This is the home for Studio in the Woods sometimes we move somewhere else, to Meredith, to McLaughlin, Ted, you know. There's the kitchen. So the next building we made was more ambitious in some ways. It wanted to be made for no money. What if we made a building 50 grand? What if we made a building for no money? You know, and I'm really interested in this because my daughter, who's 17, who's been homeschooled, is a filmmaker. And she's constantly told, oh, you can't make a film, you haven't got 750 grand. I'm like, you know, you've got an old iPhone, you can make a film. And of course she knows that, you know. And I love this sense of what is so difficult about being an architect is that you need someone to commission you to make a building. But what if we just commissioned ourselves and just use the kind of crap we had lying around us to make buildings from, you know, and the skills we have? What if we didn't need people to constantly feed us stuff and we could just do it ourselves? So this is a little loo we made for the studio. Of course we made it for no money, just with stuff that was lying around, you know. The waste products we had lying around, we had a digger off hire, you know. We made this little loo just with the stuff. Same people, you know, same, you know, in a way, same materials, tiny bathrooms, you know, that kind of stuff. And this is the studio that we made it for no money. Of course, no one understood they were making what might have thought to be a piece of architecture, because I think there was one architect said that, you know, an outhouse isn't architecture. It can never be architecture. And then we did drawing afterwards, and then we made the model. All the way around. So there's a kind of way of beginning to make buildings that is kind of gradually getting more sophisticated. And the next building we made tied into our forest management plan. These are the same people gradually acquiring greater carpentry skills. You know, you can see a truss for the next building. And they're getting better at making buildings, and these people are now developing relationships with other people in our valley, and the next valley, making their buildings. You know, which is really interesting. Not really being aware of it, it's just kind of what resourceful rural people do. I kind of like that. Again, building maybe the digger, this is our little prototyping workshop we made, you know, in the workshop there. You know. But I think there is an interesting, this is the building we made, and it's really interesting that if you look at that building there, you know, that's it. But it's, you know, it's kind of shed. But it's the same as this building that Alan, my neighbour, designed. And you know, Kate, who works with me, asks, why is that one not a piece of architecture, but the other one is? And I don't know if it's fair, or whether it's true, or what the answer to that question is. Then, in that same building, we made this little building, which is where my daughter now lives. We made it as a little prototype, you know, 20 grand house, just using the same section of timber. So all these last couple of buildings we made with the same section of timber. I grandly call them equivalent buildings. You know, this is made out of 5x2. And it was a way of making a building that could be built effectively without planning. It's a movable building, it's on a trailer chassis. And we made it with, again, the same people who are getting even more sophisticated in terms of how they may put buildings together. Did actually draw that one. But then this was a way of understanding how we could make a building that was open source, available to anyone. They could have these plans, make a building anywhere in the world with their materials, their stuff, and just the stuff they had lying around us. And how, in a way, I think what was interesting for me was how could a building straddle the line between being a piece of architecture and being a piece of rural infrastructure? Because when we architect other people buildings, we hope that they will conceive of them as architecture. But what if we just did a building that was just like a piece of rural infrastructure instead? So this is us making the building here, that's the kind of trailer chassis, using it to take the frames down. Simon, who's a yurtling, who lives in the woods, that used to be a trapeze artist, very good one behind. Jim there, who's an apprentice, making this building as a kind of prototype, super low-cost house for 20 grand, just with the stuff we had around us, and using, again, leftover stuff. We bought hoarding from a building in Bath that could be used on a building site, turn around the other way and use it to line the building, etc., etc. And then, again, of course, as we know, my daughter's 28. Her boyfriend is a doctor who works full time, but can't afford to rent a house in Bristol where he works, so they live in next to him. And it's kind of interesting, and I think it doesn't have any wider applicability in some ways, but at the same time it kind of does, that the buildings that we conceive of are so heavy and permanent. And I wonder whether there's another way of making architecture that allows us to kind of dwell in a kind of slightly more kind of tentative way, in landscape. So of course, you may understand now that this is a practice. But we also, and I rattle through some buildings now, do some proper work, and this stuff feeds into other communities, I would hope. So alongside all the other homemade stuff, there's other very slightly less homemade stuff that we do for other communities. So this is a building, and I hope in a way I will demonstrate, if I can, without being too, again, grandiose, the value of architecture. Because we won this building here. We were asked to do a steel frame shed by the Forestry Commission. We won a tender, super cheap, and we said, well, you could build a shed, but also, you could use your wood, and you could use your people, and we could do a building that had a bigger kind of agenda than just doing the least possible. Because of course we all know that value engineering, doing the least we can, is the way that culturally we make buildings now in any public context. So we worked out how we could do a Belfast Truss type building using low skill, nails together, taking the timber and cutting it up. But then of course we realised that Westernburg Arboretum, they have the best timber anywhere in the world. I mean, quite literally, they have the best timber in the world, and they have never, ever made a building out of their own timber. So we felled some trees that were going to come out anyway as part of their tree management plan, and then we moved them out into the fields that had just been regrassed with this I can't remember what sort of grass that is. It's a new grassland they made. And this is what they asked us for. This, And we said, well, actually, let's look at every rural community and understand that there are these little upright buildings where people live and get together, and there are more sort of barn-like spaces where people come and work. And there's a recognisable place-making in this, and we just said, well, let's do that. Let's just do this, and this is the special building that we'll have next to it where people will come, get together in the morning and have lunch and work, and then they'll go out into the kind of big building. So the trees that we felled were too big, of course, to put through to take away from the site, and we had to run a hewing workshop with local people to understand how we can make these into continuous structural members. And these are, interestingly, the biggest pieces of timber ever used in construction, ever used in single pieces of construction, I think, anywhere ever. 22 metres long and however big, but of course we had the luxury of doing that because it was at Westernburg Arboretum, and we didn't have to go anywhere, and we could get people in to hew them. We had Charlie's skill to know how to kind of choreograph all of this stuff. So then you get the skill, we'll give them the money, and then, of course, this is the more expensive way of making a building, curiously. It's kind of absurd than getting a steel frame shed. Steel frame sheds are really cheap, This is an expensive way of making a building because you have to take care. But we were given the money by the Wolfson Foundation on the basis that we did a heavy carpentry building that people could become upskilled, and we could use as a template, make the big buildings and little buildings with people's own timber in rural places. You can see the scale of these trusses, one with its curvature being taken, these people, another course then working on it with us, making these trusses, in the yard, and then, scale of somebody there, matched with an intern, with a volunteer, making this and putting it up, and then using the rest of the timber to clad it in, and a person who's that big. So that's what we were asked to make, and of course that's what we made. And, it's a shed. It has, you could say there's no architecture in this. It's not a look-at-me type building in the same way that the Hook Park big shed was. And my father is eternally disappointed in this building. He's saying, I love that other shed you did. Anyway. So this is, it's a very simple, it's a shed. It doesn't purport to be anything but a shed. It's that, really, but a different version. So the little building we made next to it is that one. We made all the offcuts, really, and all the pieces of timber that we couldn't put into big exposed pieces of heavy carpentry, made a little building next to it. Has one inflection to let the morning sun come into this yard to thaw the ice this time of year in winter. And we made a little mess room. It's called a mess room. We designed Piers, a little prototype building, and it was made again with volunteers who donated hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours' time to learn how to make buildings. And then they made this building with us, and then they now use these skills and all sorts of other buildings around Westonbirt. So they use this building to understand how they can make other buildings at Westonbirt. This is the little building here. And again, it's a tiny little derivative, picture of building. But it was kind of potent to the people that worked on it. It was really potent for them. And for me, it was kind of transformative in many ways. Inside, in the kitchen, we made everything with literally everything. And so we've been invited back to do some more buildings, which I'm just going to touch on. I'm nearly done, don't worry. I'm going to touch on it. I do have this kind of nagging guilt that I don't work in the city enough, and we will know, all of us, that the big change in our lifetime, or in our parents' lifetime from now, is that we've gone from 2% urbanised to 50%, and if we want to live in an eco-house, we'll move to an air-conditioned apartment in the city, and we will never build a natural landscape. It's kind of stated a fact. So I should only work in the city, and I don't, and I constantly worry about it. So when I'm asked to make buildings in the city, I kind of do, and this is a building we made in the centre of Bath. And I think what's really interesting for architects is that, we conceive of buildings, the space around elevations. It's just what architects do. But what's so interesting about cities, other than really the way that we need to live in, it allows people of the whole world to live on 2% of the land in the world, is that when we look at all of these buildings, what's kind of amazing about them is that that building and that building are the only buildings that have kind of elevations. They're the only buildings that are in the round. The rest of it has an obligation greater than itself. It is only there to make a piece of public realm. That's it. It exists as backdrop to streets and squares. Almost nothing else matters. You can take all these buildings, you can make them out of brick, put PVC windows in, and it would matter a bit, but it wouldn't matter that much. The city would still be a great city. And I think that's a really interesting thing about this city. And I live on the fringes of it, Bath. So we made that building there just with that manner, that we make a building that was just a piece of space in the centre of the city, and I think this is the city that we know, and this is the city that becomes interesting as it comes down to the river. And these are the old artisan courtyards here, where the grain came up from the river and all the materials and the stone and everything else, and then moved into the city from this. And over time, all these yards become privatised, and you used to be able to walk from yard to yard to yard to yard to yard, and along the river, as a kind of finer grained route through the city. And we said, okay, we did nothing else, let's just restore those things. So we spent a year negotiating with the local authority to open up the river walk from the edge of the city at Bathhampton into the city. And what it means is, over the next 20 or 30 years, whenever there's a planning application, you have to give the walk back to the city. So our building was the first and the next, and now there's like 15. So over time, we're piecing together these routes back through the city. We said, let's make the courtyard link to the other courtyard, so we made a way through. And then let's just make a piece of space in the middle of our building that is public space, and we'll push everything else to the edge. There's no architecture. But I think also what's interesting about Bath is that the sort of second-tier buildings are much more interesting. The kind of the way they make stairs, the way they know how to bring light in, the way they know how to kind of use materials. All this stuff is kind of really, really, really interesting, I think. This is the kind of building, and this is the space here. It's a public space in the middle, and the buildings just sit around. Very little architecture in the way that is kind of, this is just materials chosen to bring you in to public realm and private spaces, which is a health clinic and a martial arts studio, and kind of sit around. And I'm not going to touch on this. I just wanted to kind of use it as a way of trying to explain that there is this thing, the city, and I'm not representing it enough, because there's one or two other projects I just want to kind of touch on instead. And in fact, I'm going to, because I know we're skipping, I have nothing to say about these buildings. They're not interesting. Building in America, it's just why today. It's on the side of America, it's absurd. This is the most potent building I've ever worked on here. This is, I think, almost the last. I'm going to touch on one or two after this. But, so this isn't the most deprived part of the United Kingdom, but it's the area with the least social mobility. This is West Somerset, here. Obviously Bath is up here, Bristol, Cardiff is over here. And if you were born poor here, you stay poor. It's a kind of, again, statement of fact, statistically. Because, there is no way out, here, and all the industry has died. There's no transport links anywhere. There's a tiny road to Taunton, that's it. So this community got together, and I think this is really interesting for us as architects, because, we are receivers of commissions. But these 4 million came back to their town, they went to London, done all sorts of things, and just wanted to initiate, they're not architects, but they wanted to initiate a set of buildings that would bring about change in their place. So they did a piece of work, it took 5 years, consultation, to work out what buildings could they do that would act to bring about change in this city, to make jobs, to bring people together. And what's really interesting about this place is that it's as divided as every other place in the United Kingdom. There's kind of hardcore Brexiters and there's kind of hardcore architects. And how can they come together and make a set of buildings that's about co-production? Although they say it's not just about co-production. It's really, really interesting. So this is what they set out to solve at the beginning of making this building. Low social mobility, blah, 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 no country game, no hope, no opportunity. Familiar story. We did a little piece of work and worked out what buildings we needed to do. They got 15 grand originally for us to do a piece of work that took many years, actually. It was kind of master plan, understanding how the first building would allow people to come in to the town, to park, and not just use that bit of the town, but to come up to a visitor centre and use the whole town. But this is the big building where recently they've been given a significant amount of money by a public grant to make this building here, because they demonstrated the social impact of it. It was a town that had an extraordinary legacy of making an industry, and all of that, as we know, from all of these coastal towns, kind of died. And Urban Splash have tried to make this absurd, set of 60 apartments, to second home, absurd, got a consent and kind of disappeared. It was kind of outrage. So we designed this building here that was really about establishing a new set of links to the coastal path, links back into the city. And in simple terms, we just made a piece of open public realm with some buildings that sat alongside it and a courtyard in the middle. That's it, But what's really interesting, if you look at this bit of coast through a set of fresh eyes, it has a kind of a strange, most unusual buildings in the world. So, these are kind of mind-blowing. They're just, things that we take for granted that, if you saw that, we're just familiarised with these things, but if you saw this is just amazing pieces of, coastal non-architecture. Ways of coming up through rocks, and this is Cleveland Pier, actually, which is a piece of architecture. A way of using kind of public space, giving public space back to places. And I think it's really interesting that the coast is such a fantastic resource in terms of being a public space, having open public space that is democratic. And the town is just a series of ad hoc buildings on this kind of cliff here. So we said, let's just make some more of that. So our buildings, there is this first floor piece of public space that you can walk around, move, that you can link back to the coastal park. We're opening from here to here, and then we'll just have some art studios that sit alongside it. We make a plinth out of the kind of dredge stilt from the basin here, and then we'll just make some sheds that sit on top of it. And this is what we're doing. And I think what's interesting is not really the building, and I'm just using it to show how communities can get together. This group of women never procured a building, never commissioned a building before. We're given 5.3 million plus another 2 million to build this building, because critically they could demonstrate the impact of this. They could show what they were going to change when this building was built, and it kind of 37 jobs that's created. There's an area of impact that's kind of huge, and this is about to start on site now. it's kind of really exciting. This is the building when it's kind of built, and so on. Oh, damn, I thought I put two, yes, that's it. So this is, that is kind of 5 years' work, really. I mean, there's an amazing document that demonstrates how they know that they'll make 37 new jobs. How they, all of this stuff is the product of their research. And it's an extraordinarily empowering thing to see for an architect who is just used to getting a call to making some, telling people what shade and colour it is, really. I mean, kind of mind, really. I mean, and that's the area of impact. I mean, kind of extraordinary. So, because I'm running out of time, I'm not going to tell you about this, which is an absurd thing we just made. I mean, we made a building here, and it funds the other stuff that we do. This building is not interesting. It's a building in the garden. It's made out of stone and crushed, and we reused it. It's just absurd, And so I'm not going to touch on this, but I'm just going to touch on the projects we did at Reading, and then show how the work we've done here is now feeding into other things. This was £12,000 a square metre. This is the first building that we did with the students at the School of Architecture 2 or 3 years ago. And we just did it in a very simple way. I mean, Lorraine, of course, initiated it in an incredibly easy way, which no other School of Architecture has ever done. I say easy, she made it seem easy, but no architecture school. What you won't know as architects is that no architecture school makes stuff. No architecture school. This is the kind of architecture school, it's Reading, and it's a public school of art. Anyone can come here. It's not the AA, you have to pay 30 grand a year to go there. It's a private school of architecture. No school of architecture is doing this stuff. And if they do it, the odd school, it's kind of a year-long program. Here, we've done a series of buildings that have popped up in 4 days at the end of the time, alongside everything else. So these buildings that we've been doing here have allowed us to actually access another, really because I think this is interesting in terms of what you get from academia other than just the teaching. I was aware of making it popped up out of the architecture school, it was amazing, it was incredibly empowering for me and Charlie, and I hope the students that did it. It's kind of, there's a narrative around how this building again was designed through making rather than drawing. But what is really interesting is the choreography of all of this, the health and safety, the people, making sure people are okay, making sure people are empowered, making sure people are safe, is a really sophisticated thing. I can't do it, but Charlie, who I work with, kind of can. And that's Charlie, actually there. And that, developing those skills, and me as an architect partnering with people that have those skills, allows me to test a way of working when people like Lorraine allow us, and take it into other places, back into the Forestry Commission. So this is the pavilion we made this year. Again, with these students here, of course, helped together by Charlie and his team. An amazing piece of construction by architecture students at the end of the year, having done everything that other architecture students do as part of their curriculum activities. They then made this as the pavilion that hosted the end of year show, and this then went from Reading to a local primary school and is there. This is an urban room, and then went to become an outdoor classroom here at Badgemore Primary School. So if I show you this is our bid document. I mean, in terms of what I've been asked to talk about, which is how does academia go back into practice. This is our bid document for Westonborough, for another range of projects. This is, again, the same project we've done for the Onion Collective. This way of working with people, this is Studio in the Woods. All of this stuff that I've kind of woven through 20 years of practice, coming back in and showing how we can use those skills to make a new set of shelters with a series of homeless people and ex-addicts and ex-offenders at Westonborough, using all of these skills that isn't just, I hope, what shape and colour things are, but a way of really harnessing the kind of skill in a community to make a series of buildings. So these buildings here are being designed and made with people. These buildings here are made by these people who have never, homeless people, ex-addicts, ex-offenders, making these buildings with us, like this, that we're then taking, Charlie there, and making little models of, we're scanning them in, and then using those models to inform what we make. So I'm just kind of touching on how potent this kind of way, this kind of crossover into academia is for us. And this is now, finally, what we're doing in Venice. We're doing the same thing in the Biennale next year with the people in Venice and the kind of international, I suppose, my brothers in America, and a series of people that will make a set of improvised spaces with a set of skills that will exist in Venice to provide a set of spaces that Venetians can use as a piece of public infrastructure to be able to use in a way that the Biennale has historically excluded them, let's say. That's it, actually. I'm going to stop here and tell you one last thing, which of course, I'm not even going to tell you that one last thing, actually. My slide has dropped off. But that's enough, I think. Thank you.
Yes, that was quite a tour de force. I've never seen anybody using so many slides. Right, we have a bit of time for questions. We can have
If there are a few, yeah, I'm delighted if anyone wants to. There's no obligation.
Shall I start while you're thinking?
I'm here too.
I can have a quick question. If you go to Venice, I've a particular interest in flooding.
Sure.
Of stopping flooding, but you go to Venice, its history, its own water. Do you adjust your design in an environment that's so prone to flooding, and it's so much in the news today?
Yeah, I think the thing for us is that how do you take a natural, but how do you not constantly go like this to the environment? And it's a really interesting phenomenon. And the lessons for me living where I do is that it is all around you all the time. You kind of deal with it. And what we have tried to do for hundreds of years is go like that to it. In fact, my undergraduate thesis was really like that. How we went when we settled in Australia. We went like that. And over time, and I think there's what I'm really interested in is how can cities be wild places? Because if we live in a city and not have as much access to wild landscape as if we be wild or whatever we do, how can we have real bits of wildness in the city? And Venice is amazing. It's totally wild. It's on the sea comes in and floods it. There are places in Australia, like Brisbane, where pieces of Wild National Park come into the city. There are places in Sydney, which feels like a kind of wild place. I've just been in Brighton for 2 days, and extraordinarily there, it felt like a wild landscape. I was staying on the seafront, I was running on the seafront in the morning, and walked out like gales. And we've been used to cities being kind of tame places. And I think Venice, it's a reminder of what's happened the last couple of days. Venice isn't a tame place. It's a wild piece of land. And understanding how we can work with that, and that isn't a problem, is something I think we need to address. So very much, I hope that we adjust what we do to what's happening.
Good. Sorry, I saw hands, and there's a microphone there already.
Hello, I really enjoyed that. I'm also a fellow PhD student here. I'm in film, theatre and television. I've also been involved with the School of Architecture with the last 2 builds that they did. With Reside Dance CIC, we're a local dance company, and I'm really interested to hear whether you've got any plans on your thinking of choreographic thinking, because I was really interested in how you thought it was theatre and all the embodied responses. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, future plans.
Carolina, who's one of my PhD supervisors, should probably talk about that. But I'm really interested in this idea of when we make something that's kind of performance, and we try and control architecture so there is no performance. We control everything on our heads so there cannot be an improvised set of relationships that we stand slightly further away from and allow the contingencies to inform what we do. And when I think of the little things that I described in student awards, they are pieces of performance, I would see. And when I read anthropologists like Tim Ingold, he will describe the act of making as a set of performances that just happen and they're unpredictable, and that's incredibly exciting. So the kind of volatility of performance for me is the most exciting thing. And in a way, what architecture does is try and control everything. If we can try and control less, I think performance is much more kind of interesting. So it's difficult to, it's a whole PhD thesis, I suspect. But actually, performance for me personally is and in a way, if I did something else, I would do something where I really could feel things through my fingertips. And in a way, what I try to do in architecture is feel things through my fingertips in a way that architecture prohibits. Because architecture has to have a distinction between we do, they make, we think they make. And that's incredibly restricting, and you can't think with your fingertips, you can't be agile, you have to plan everything. You really have to plan everything. Otherwise you get sued. And so learning how not to plan is a kind of core thesis for my way of working. And in a way that's part of what performance is, I think. I hope that's in part answered something. Because in the blue shirt, the blue jumper as well.
Like you, I'm not an architect, but I was just wondering, when you put these structures together, I didn't hear engineering calculations coming to it.
Sure.
Do you just look at it, and if it looks right, it is good? Is it that hit and miss, or how much engineering goes into it?
A lot of engineering goes into most of
Let's
it.
hear that.
Curiously, not the buildings I've done for myself, they're not engineered. But they're, as I get older, there's more rules of thumb you can kind of work with. But we always work with engineers, so they're always alongside us, calculating, improvising. But what again was really interesting is that there's another way of calculating things that is riskier, or not riskier, but seems riskier. A lot of the buildings we did here 2 years ago, we had to live test in situ, and we depended on the sort of tacit knowledge that the engineer had developed over 20 years of practice, and to judge how safe something was, and be able to kind of effectively, engineer it, but in a kind of slightly different way. And a lot of the things that we have to do is work our way around quite straightforward sets of regulations. So part of the big shed, we couldn't work to conventional span tables because the timber was ungraded. So we had to trust the tacit knowledge of the people that were making it, and then load test it in situ afterwards. But most of the buildings are engineered beforehand, or the rest of the buildings were engineered beforehand. All the proper buildings we do for the proper clients are always engineered. I mean, we have to in terms of indemnity insurance. I am a chartered architect. I have to carry insurance, and we have to work with people that take that responsibility. But the buildings I've done for myself, I mean, the house is engineered, the studio is not engineered. My daughter's house isn't engineered. I mean, we just cut rules of thumb, straightforward. I understand a little bit about bracing and diaphragm action, and often through when things don't work actually. So they are engineered, yes. And the studio in the woods, we have an engineer there who's calculating, looking and judging, and working out how to do it safely is really critical, as Lorraine will know. Lorraine's still here. I mean, convincing people that all of this stuff can be done safely is really important. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
On the buildings you were doing here, what structures you were doing?
On the structures you were doing here, I noticed you've got curved wooden beams. How do you manufacture those?
Really good question. So the first one has curvature, and the first one is a grid shell. And what's really interesting about a grid shell is that you use very thin, floppy timber that has no strength, really, until it's tensioned. So what we did there was lay a mat out on the ground of timber that was just cable tied together. You could move it around, had no strength. So it picked it up, it was kind of floppy. But as we brought it in, with the help of an engineer, as we brought it in, it kind of stiffens and kind of locks into place and develops a strength so people can stand on top of it through twisting it and bending it into place. It's like when you get a ruler and kind of do that. So that we manufactured through very straightforward, low-tech technology of putting it under tension and compression, tension one side, compression the other, and it will lock it into shape effectively. Then you have to lock the base so it can't ping out. Curved stuff is usually expensive unless you do it like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
I think if there are no more questions, I just want to, on your behalf, once more thank Piers for a great lecture and hopefully inspiring you to, or maybe starting your own back garden on a small scale.
With an engineer. Don't do this at home.
License now to build, expertise not required, enthusiasm and experimentation is. So, can we all just once more thank Piers for that?